Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Modern B2B Payments in Hospitality, Reducing Fraud, Optimizing Cash Flow, and Streamlining Accounts Payable. My name is Mark Brousseau. I'm president of Brousseau and Associates. I'm pleased to be joined today by David Disk. Today's webinar is brought to you by Data Plus. A few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially get started. To ensure call quality, everyone's voice lines have been muted today. We encourage you to ask questions throughout today's webinar. To do so, simply use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit your questions to me. We'll answer your questions at the conclusion of today's webinar. And finally, an on-demand recording of today's webinar will be made available to all of you within the next few business days. We encourage you to share it with your peers and your co-workers. We all know that hospitality finance is uniquely complex. You're juggling multiple properties, seasonality, high vendor counts, and a constant flow of purchases, whether it's linens or F&B or maintenance or even marketing. And all of that flows through your accounts payable process. When your payments run smoothly, the whole operation feels the benefit. But when payments break down, well, maybe checks go missing or vendors are slow to cash or fraudsters manage to sneak through. Well, now the impact is immediate, it's onerous, and it's really expensive. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How it is that you can streamline your payments processes. And it's a topic that's very top of mind for many organizations today. So here's what we're going to discuss today. We'll start with the current B2B payments landscape, what methods are being used, where the volume's shifting, and why checks are still stubbornly persistent in hospitality. From there, we'll dig into hospitality-specific challenges that you all face. We'll talk about what it is that makes payments more complex and more vulnerable. We'll unpack the fastest growing digital payment methods, whether they're virtual cards, and why it is they're shaping the modern AP toolkit. We'll also explore a modern optimized payment mix, including how it is that DP Pay from Data Plus can help hospitality companies intelligently route payments for lower fraud risk and higher operational efficiency. And then we'll look at ROI and vendor enablement because, well, we all know that this won't work unless your suppliers come along for the journey and it makes financial sense for your organization. And finally, we'll walk through implementation and key takeaways, and we'll also include a wrap-up with Q&A. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump right in. And we wanted to start with the lay of the land, where it is we are today when it comes to the payments mix. And if we look at the latest stats from the Federal Reserve Payments Study, what you'll find is that ACH is leading, representing somewhere around half to maybe 2/3 of payments, depending on organizations. Cards are representing 26% or more of payments. And unfortunately, checks still make up a significant part of the payment mix, depending on vertical. We also see wires remain common for high value payments, and virtual cards, despite being the fastest growing method, are still under 10%. But here's the part that should get every hospitality finance leader's attention. There's still over $5 trillion in B2B payments moving by check every single year. Think about that. Over $5 trillion being exposed to fraud, to delays, to manual processing. And unfortunately, hospitality is disproportionately represented in that number. The opportunity here, folks, is massive because optimizing your payment mix, shifting from checks towards secure digital methods, is one of the few levers that can simultaneously help you reduce fraud, improve visibility, streamline AP, and lower your operating costs all at the same time. And this is where your payment strategy becomes a true financial advantage. So, Dave, from the Data Plus side, when customers finally shift from checks to a more digital mix, what's the biggest operational improvement they typically notice first?
Yeah, I think that the biggest operational improvement is the fact that they no longer have to print and mail checks in-house. You think about the amount of time the AP department spend printing, stuffing, and probably manual workflow. So what Data Plus does is it fully automates that process and prints the checks remotely, so you don't have to do that in-house through an automated process for those payments that still need to go out on paper check. And obviously our goal is to shift the paper to digital means that are more secure and more efficient.
And that really is the key here, because digital transformation is happening across every industry. But payment transformation is the one area where the gap between the leaders and the laggards seems to be the widest. Here's what the data shows us. 58% of B2B payments are now digital, and that's up from 42% just a few years ago before the pandemic. Virtual card usage, well, that's grown 300% since 2019, and there's no slowdown in the growth rate in sight. Unfortunately, in hospitality, what we find is 65% still use checks for more than half of their payments. So hospitality is not behind because digital payments are heard. It's because we really haven't embraced a digital transformation initiative there. And the fact is that the drivers pushing this transformation forward are real. Remote work has reduced access to on-site check printers. Check fraud is rising significantly, incredibly, even as check volumes decline. CFOs want real-time visibility, not just check float. And working capital is becoming a board level or owner level priority. And when you combine all of these forces, digital payments become not just a convenience to our finance departments, they really become a financial strategy. Dave, what are you hearing from hospitality CFOs and finance leaders who are under pressure to modernize? What's motivating them right now to move to electronic payments?
I think there's a couple factors. One is check fraud. When you look at B2B payments, and you'll see that, I believe, later in the presentation, has the highest risk of fraud. And we're hearing from our customers all the time that they're having incidents, right? Maybe a lack of positive pay processing, the fact that they haven't been able to deploy digital payments. So it's just a smart thing to do to make the shift. And one of the things that we focus on Data Plus is we find that the ecosystem is kind of decentralized, right? If you're doing ACH, you've got a unique process with your bank. If you're doing card, maybe you've got a different process. If you're doing check, you've got a third process. So what we've done is we tried to make it easy for hotel groups to modernize their payments by bringing it right into the DP Finance platform and having all the payments executed and deployed through a single source.
Yeah, and this slide really hits on the point that Dave was trying to make about the inefficiencies and risk and lack of speed that come with paper checks. It really quantifies it. Let's think about this for a second. Check stock, envelopes, postage, it probably costs somewhere between $2 and $3 per transaction. Labor for printing, signing, and mailing, let's call that $1 to $2 per transaction. Bank fees and reconciliation, well, that adds some more cost. And before you know it, you're at $4 to $7 per check conservatively. And that's just the beginning, folks, because there's a lot of hidden costs associated with paper checks as well. Dave mentioned the first one, which is fraud exposure, right? Checks account for about 30% of all payment fraud. We also have lost and stolen checks. We have vendors calling AP asking, hey, where's my payment? Because things got slowed down in the mail. Reissuance costs and delays. There's the negative impact on vendor relationships when you can only pay with check and can't pay them electronically in their preferred method. And the problems are only getting worse. As I mentioned a few moments ago, check fraud keeps rising. 63% of all organizations experienced check fraud last year. And the industry saw a 10% year-over-year increase. So when you add it all up, every manual check is more than a small operational leak. It's a big drain on our resources. When you multiply that by thousands of payments, maybe per year or maybe even per month, depending on your size, now we're talking about real material financial impact on your business. Dave, when customers finally run a cost analysis, what surprises them the most about their true per check costs?
Now, when you think about it, Mark, you just hit it. I mean, if you are processing paper checks at, let's say, even $2 to $3 a check, you don't think about it weekly and monthly when you're processing checks. But when you look at how many disbursements you do in a given year, it's material. It's probably material enough to cover the salary of one person in your AP department if you're able to shift, let's say 80% of your check disbursements to ACH or virtual card that are virtually, no cost to very, very minimal cost.
When you break down the fraud risk by payment type, well, now the story becomes even clearer. What we find is checks represent 30% of all fraud losses. That's the highest risk among payment methods. ACH today accounts for around 9% of fraud losses, and unfortunately, that's growing. Wire transfers account for 5 to 8% of fraud. Now, that's heavily targeted to business email compromise or BEC attacks. And unfortunately, BEC is the fastest growing form of payment fraud. And then we have virtual cards. Virtual cards actually have the lowest fraud rate of any payment method. And there's a reason for that. They're inherently more secure because they remove exposure. There's no check to steal, no bank account to compromise, no routing number floating around in your email. Instead, what you get is a one-time use token locked into a specific vendor for a specific amount, for a specific time window. And this is why shifting a payment mix isn't just about efficiency, it's also about quantifiable risk reduction. And virtual cards really have fraud mitigation baked right in. Let's spend a moment on virtual cards because in my opinion, they're one of the most misunderstood payment methods, but also one of the most powerful. A virtual card, for those of you who don't know, is simply a single-use system-generated card number issued for a specific payment. It expires after one transaction. It can only be used by the designated vendor, and the exact payment amount is pre-authorized. From a security standpoint, this is really game-changing. Unlike ACH, you're not giving anyone your bank account details. Unlike checks, there's nothing to get stolen or altered. And unlike wires, nothing can be rerouted after approval. And for you and your suppliers, well, you get a lot of operational benefits too. There's immediate delivery. You get rich remittance data that makes AR reconciliation a breeze. And you get automated reconciliation to your Data Plus system. Virtual cards have 6 times lower the fraud rates than checks and twice as low as ACH, according to recent data. And when hospitality companies adopt virtual cards, well, the conversation can change almost instantly when it comes to fraud. Dave, what's the biggest aha moment clients have once they start using virtual cards for the first time?
I think there's two. One is it's very different than the traditional type of card payment that we make, right? It's not a physical plastic. It's not leaving your card number on file with a vendor. It's really an AP transaction. It's an electronic transaction that happens to run on the card rails. And to your point, it's extremely secure. It auto reconciles. And the other thing is the enhanced transparency and visibility. You can see the status of a card in real time, unlike a check or an ACH. You have to wait for it to clear the bank. With a card, you can see if it's off, decline, plus you have the network rules which back it up if you ever have a dispute with the vendor.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about payment optimization, and we wanted to sort of put that in black and white terms for you. This slide paints a very clear before and after picture. Before payment optimization, a typical hospitality payment mix might look like this, right? 25 to to 30% paper checks, 50 to 60% ACH, 10 to 15% wires, probably 2 to 5% cards. This mix, well, it's functional, but it's not really strategic. It carries high fraud exposure, high processing costs, and quite frankly, low automation potential. It really holds your organization back. Now I want you to compare that to what I'd call an optimized payment mix. Now we're talking about less than 10% checks. ACH might be the digital backbone, controlled, limited wire usage, and virtual cards now making up 18 to 25% or more of all of your payments. This shift alone can drive an 80% reduction in your fraud exposure, not to mention a significant reduction in your costs. And when the payment mix becomes intentional, not accidental, in other words, you make it strategic, AP transforms from a cost center to a strategic asset. So, Dave, for hospitality firms that want to go from the left side of this to a slide to the right side, where do you recommend they begin?
So I'd recommend, they reach out to their client services representative. The easiest thing to do is to do a view of their current payment mix, which we have in Data Plus, and do a vendor match. That'll define what's cardable, right? What are your peers paying on card today, even though you're not? There's a lot of vendors that accept. And then once we've addressed the cardable vendors, the most secure mix, right? Then we want to look at what can we pay on ACH and automate so that we mitigate your fraud risk on check and lower your processing costs. And I think you'd be surprised. We see customers saving, $30,000 a year, just mitigating and reducing the processing costs. And then on top of that, there's a small rebate that's earned. And the other thing that we've been very thoughtful about, and I think very innovative and market leading, is we've fully embedded the payment experience within the DP Finance project. So you don't have to use third-party platforms to facilitate all these payments. It automatically happens. We've partnered with a best-in-class payment processor that provides, secure payment processing on all the payment rails, and just bundles it up really beautiful within your DP Finance platform.
How much work is this vendor match that you described on the part of the user?
Thank you, Mark. Good question. It's no work. It's fully automated. You permission us. We'll perform the match, come back within probably 3 to 5 days, and give you a summary of what your current mix is, what the mix would look like on DP Pay, and what the savings would be.
As Dave was suggesting, the right payment partner can really have a big impact on the complexity of your payment optimization. They can bake it directly into your existing Data Plus workflow. And that matters for a couple of reasons. No manual data entry. You're not typing payment information into some other system. You get intelligent routing. Payments automatically flow to the optimal method, card when possible, ACH when preferred, checks when absolutely necessary. You get automated reconciliation with real-time matching the month end. It becomes easier, cleaner, unified visibility. Every property and every payment is visible in one Data Plus dashboard. And vendor enablement is a major differentiator for many providers. Leading providers like Data Plus, they offer access to a huge database of pre-verified suppliers. They have a dedicated enrollment team to contact your vendors for you so you don't have to do it. They offer matching logic that identifies the most likely virtual card adopters, and they offer ongoing optimization, not just one-time setup. This way, as you have churn in your supplier base or the preferences change, you're able to catch that and continually keep fine-tuning your payment mix. The goal of all of this is very simple. Shift from checks to digital in a way that's scalable, secure, and operationally light. Dave, what part of DP Pay's embedded workflow tends to surprise customers the most during implementation?
I think it's twofold. One, it's the easy use, right? Because you're working in the environment that you already know. And then secondly, we know that it's an effort to make a shift, right? Contact vendors, find out if they'll accept card, find out if they'll accept an ACH and collect the credentials. So that's the heavy lifting that we take off of all of our customers' plates. We work very closely with our payment partner, Edenred. They're very experienced in this. And a lot of the vendors that are being paid today, we already have that information. So it accelerates that process. We also recognize that every customer has some unique vendor relationships and maybe some sensitive vendor relationships. So those vendors are also treated very uniquely, and it's not a one size fits all, right? It's basically a marrying of the right preferences and the preferred preferences, if I could speak properly, between vendor and buyer, right? So we take the sensitivities of the buyer or the vendor, marry them with the desires of the buyer to get the right optimal mix and deliver a very good service in a very short amount of time.
Let's take a look at a case study of an actual hospitality company that made the move to electronic payments. This client had 15 hotels and processed about 2,200 vendor payments a month, with 85% of them going out by check, not uncommon. That meant they were spending over $10,000 a month on processing fees alone. Well, here's what happened. They, at first, activated DP Pay, vendor analysis complete. Next, the vendor enablement began. Virtual card adoption quickly went to 18%. And before you know it, optimization kicked in. Adoption rose to 25%. And as a result, the year one results were really compelling. $28,000 in savings and rebates, 60% reduction in check fraud risk, 40% reduction in AP processing time. And this isn't all just theory, that's lived experience from a hospitality group just like many of you. And if you're wondering if this is a bluebird, well, here's another example of a company that was able to optimize their payment mix. Before DP Pay, they had 85% checks, 12% ACH, 3% cards. Soon after DP Pay went in, within 6 months, check volumes dropped to 20% of the payment mix. They had 55% ACH, 25% virtual cards, and the outcomes really reflected this shift. $28,000 a year in savings and rebates, 82% reduction in fraud exposure, 60% decrease in check fraud risk, and 90% of manual reconciliation was completely eliminated. Notice the trend here. The organization that leans into optimization doesn't just save money, they reduce operational friction and make the entire AP function stronger and more resilient. And one of the keys to doing that is vendor enablement. Of course, we know that a solution is only as good as the folks who adopt it. And one of the biggest myths about electronic payments generally and virtual cards in particular is that vendors won't accept them. But here's the truth. 15 to 21% of all vendors are immediately confirmed and ready for virtual cards. 5 to 12% can be converted with targeted outreach. And most remaining vendors simply need clear communication about what are the benefits of virtual cards. And the hospitality industry typically sees 18 to 25% adoption within just the first year for virtual cards. And that success really comes down to 4 critical things. First, starting with your high volume vendors. Second, leveraging an expert enablement team, one that knows how to articulate those benefits and find those levers for converting suppliers. You also want to make sure you have clear messaging on what's in it for the vendor, not just for you. And of course, continuous tracking and optimization to make sure that you're continuously improving the results that you get. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about forcing adoption. It's about uncovering acceptance that already exists among your suppliers and then nurturing it, growing it. So, Dave, what's the number one misunderstanding hospitality vendors have about virtual cards, and how do you overcome it?
Well, I'd like to talk to one other point before I talk to the vendors. You've got VC confirmed and VC opportunities. One thing I'd like to point out is, right, most all hotels pay the same 80 to 120 common national vendors or large regional vendors. And then they have local footprints.
Right.
And that confirmed is vendors we know in that base of probably 80 to 120 common national and regional vendors that accept. Your peers are paying them today on virtual cards. So those are the quick wins that you're talking about. We know they accept without fees or costs to the buyer. And then the VC opportunity, right? Those are perhaps vendors we haven't touched that you have in your mix, your local footprint. And those vendors we know have a propensity for acceptance because we are able to use the Visa and MasterCard databases for matching to determine that they've accepted in the past. So that's how that mix comes together. And as you had mentioned earlier, overcoming with the vendor, well, the vendor gets immediate, delivery of that payment. You think about a check in the mail, 3 to 5 days, manual processes on the back end, probably from the AR perspective. With a virtual card or an ACH, right? Both, deliver immediate, same day, next day payment. So it's speed to deliver, detailed remittance. And again, the beauty of this program is it's not a one size fit all, right? It's an optimization of the full digital landscape, all the digital payments available today.
Yeah. I know when we talk about new systems and we get to getting down to implementation, many hospitality finance leaders tend to hold their breath. We know that implementation is concerning for some of you. You think it's going to be a heavy lift. Well, the good news is with DP Pay, it's not the heavy lift that you might think it is. Based on DP Pay's implementation model, it's very straightforward. Kickoff, alignment, system testing. Then your AP team is trained and the first payments are made. Vendor outreach and enrollment occurs, and then optimization and reporting occur. Not a lot of total hands-on for your team, but a lot of benefits within a pretty short amount of time. That doesn't mean that there won't be some bumps in the road, right? There's some common challenges, some objections that you're likely to encounter. And how you overcome them is really where the rubber starts to hit the road. So there's a few common challenges that I want you to be prepared for. And the first is vendor resistance, right? We're all concerned our vendors won't accept electronic payments. The fact is that 80% of all suppliers want to grow the amount of electronic payments that they receive. It's easier for them. They get better reporting and control. The key is clear communication and fast payments. That usually wins them over. You also might be concerned about changes to your staff, managing that change. Well, in many cases, starting small and growing fast is able to build momentum for your team, to be able to make them understand how the process works. You might also be concerned about integration. Well, with GP Pay, there's no swivel cherry. As Dave said, everything is embedded in one platform. You also might be wondering about the return on investment. Well, that vendor match analysis that Dave spoke about earlier provides a pretty predictable forecast of what you can expect, and it requires no heavy lift on your part. All of this is about reducing uncertainty and replacing it with clarity. So, Dave, which of these concerns do you hear most often from hospitality finance leaders, and how do you typically reassure them that this won't be a major challenge?
Well, I think there's two. One is we've totally eliminated any obstacles related to development resources, integration, and things to connect, right? Because Data Plus is already connected to the payment processor and is basically flipping a switch to activate the service. Secondly, is it's not a heavy lift now for staff, right? Everybody says, I'm too busy. I've got too much going on. Well, until you get hit with a significant fraud situation or something else, right? I think get in front of it, mitigate it. So here, the fact that you're working right within the system you currently work, you not have to learn another third-party system to deploy your payments. And the reconciliation is fully automated on the back end, which a lot of reconciliation in today's world is not. You're still working from bank statements, reports, information from other third parties coming in, depending on how you do your payments. So at the end of the day, it's a small commitment and investment for significant savings and risk mitigation and value prop going forward.
Yeah. As we wrap up today, there's a couple big ideas that we want to leave you with. The first is B2B payments landscape is changing fast, and hospitality can't afford to lag behind. Reality is paper checks carry hidden costs far beyond paper and postage, and that includes the highest fraud exposure of any payment method. And things are getting worse. They're not getting better. Virtual cards, they offer unmatched security and strong financial upside. Vendor enablement, well, it's absolutely achievable, especially with a structured, proven process and the right technology partner. The ROI for electronic payments, it's real, it's measurable, and in many cases, it's very, very quick. And implementation doesn't have to be complicated, especially with the embedded workflows like DP Pay. The hospitality finance teams that modernize their payments don't just reduce fraud. They also strengthen financial control. They improve their supplier relationships. They accelerate reporting. And most importantly, in some cases, they free their staff from manual work to focus more time on the things to help the business grow. Dave, if attendees remember only one thing from today, what should it be?
Well, I would love them to learn that deploying a digital payment solution with Data Plus is a very simple and easy process, and it has significant benefits in the savings of risk mitigation, payment optimization, and just efficiency in the back office. And I'm really proud of the Data Plus team. They've done a phenomenal job of being very thoughtful and delivering a very elegant solution right within the DP Finance module.
That brings us to the Q&A portion of this webinar. If you haven't already submitted a question for Dave, or if you've thought of another question for Dave, go ahead, use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit your question to me now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Our first question up is from Thomas. Thomas wants to know, any suggestions for convincing senior management that we should automate our payments to suppliers?
Well, I think revenue speaks, right? When you can demonstrate real cost savings, and typically accounts payable is a cost center. So if you can reduce processing costs, I'd recommend submit and use the vendor match as a great tool to demonstrate cost savings. And then I would also reference the Fed report. When you look at the amount of risk associated with paper check disbursements, you may not have had an incident, but it's more of a when versus an if. So again, these are all strategies and things that I think all businesses are thinking about. And the shift to digital is happening. And it's a good discussion point to have with your senior management.
That will be our final word. Dave, thanks so much for an excellent presentation and for sharing your insights with us today. And thank all of you for taking time out of your busy days to join us. On behalf of Dave Disk and Data Plus, this is Mark Brousseau. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope to speak with you all again soon.